welcome, Jared, to Righteous Savages podcast. We're glad to have you here. So.
Thanks for having me, brother. It's an honor being here.
I wanted to kind of give a brief background for people that may not know, your background, and so tell us kind of the elevator speech of Jared Hudson, where you came from, your history, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's real easy. Grew up just a regular kid from middle class household or family. Yep. Played football, hunted, fished. Mom stayed at home. Dad worked. Dad later on in life, he's always been a pastor. He was a missionary when we were kids, but later on in life he got out of business. He was in sales and different business ventures, all that stuff. He got out of that completely and went into full-time ministry. He always kind of did what's it called, where you're a part-time pastor. You don't get paid to do it.
Yep.
But whatever that type of pastor's called.
My dad did that in several little country churches when I was a kid.
That's it. So that's what. So
I understand that life.
Used to my dad doing that, and so long story short, grew up like that, just a regular kid, and dad being a pastor or a part-time pastor, and then went to fire college when I graduated high school. Played ball in school. Had the opportunity to go to college as a walk-on or a preferred walk-on, where they pay for your books or something.
Yep.
And that didn't pan out, so I went to fire college. Decided the Lord was calling me to do something else. Joined the military. Went and became a SEAL. Worked SEAL teams. That's my adult career.
Yep.
That's kind of where I really started down that route and became a SEAL, and then went through the process, got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and you can't be a SOCOM JSOC operator with that. I was already looking at getting out.
Was that anthrax related by
anthrax,
chance?
Yeah, anthrax
I've
vaccine.
Heard about that quite
anthrax.
a bit, yeah.
So that's what the doctor said, anthrax vaccine. Got out. It took a little while. SOCOM Care Coalition assigned some attorneys to me into my case, and so the Navy would keep me having diabetes. The SEAL teams would keep me, but only as a sniper school instructor, which I enjoyed. I was good at, but I didn't want to be the only non-deployable SEAL. Yep. So got out. They took care of us, took care of my family, with making sure that we had everything that we needed to move on with life. And then I started a career in law enforcement. Did full-time law enforcement for a short amount of time, and then I finished my MBA around that time, started my business, and now I run a full-time training company. And we do training primarily for the military. I still teach for the SEAL teams, teach for all DOD branches, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, federal law enforcement agencies, all of that. I keep my credentials in the state of Alabama, where I went through the academy at. I also went through, I think it's Title 19 federal law, so I can be a TFO. Yep. I'm a TFO, a task force officer, so a federal agent with Homeland Security.
Yep.
And none of them write my paycheck. I do the training company that does my paycheck, and then started a nonprofit in 2018. They'll get mad at me if I don't say we got our 501c3 status in 2019. So we started in 2018. Took us about a year, almost, not quite a year, to get that done. My wife and I did for anti-human trafficking, and I'm the CEO of that anti-human trafficking organization called Covenant Rescue Group. So that is really quick who Jared Hudson is and what I've been through. That's what I do now. The most important thing, and I don't talk a lot about it, because people will find pictures and stuff out there, especially when I got involved in politics and started doing some of that stuff of my family. But I'm a father, I'm a husband, got 3 beautiful little girls, got a beautiful wife, love my family, love my brothers, my sisters, my nieces, nephews. I'm a big family man, so I like being close to my family where we live at. But the most important thing about me is I'm a born-again believer in the person of Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
So that means Jesus died, rose again on the 3rd day for my sins and yours, and it's through him we're set free. So everything I do is important, but it's nowhere near as important with that one thing, and that's the eternal. That's who I am in the person of Jesus Christ. So that's who I am in a nutshell.
That's awesome. That's really cool, and you did that really well. So I want to kind of circle back to something you said that kind of stuck out to me, is that you must have come to faith pretty early on in life.
I did, yeah. My dad was a pastor. We were missionaries. I remember being in Turkey as little kids with my parents, and my grandparents were believers. Now, one side of the family were heavy moonshiners. They ran moonshine. That's my dad's side. He went away from that. He became a pastor, and then most of my family got saved out of that. It's pretty interesting. I was riding up with my dad to come up here. He rode with me, and he was telling some stories, from his childhood, and then stories he heard from his dad of his dad's childhood from Hazard County, of all places, Hazard County, right?
Hazard
County,
yeah.
Hazard County, Kentucky,
Yep.
and Monkey's Eyebrow, Kentucky, where they ran moonshine. So anyway, that's that one side of the family, and then my mom's side of the family. I had a great-granddaddy who was the sheriff of Etowah County, and so he was on the law side, and then the other family that was, he spent most of his time chasing the other side of the family that wasn't on the law side. So that was kind of the...
That's unique.
It is.
Funny.
It's unique. But with a dad and with grandparents that were really rooted in Christ, I grew up in Christ. And getting back to your question, I came to faith. I was 6 years old. I remember very specifically going in and asking about it. And right now, my oldest daughter, who's 9, she asked Jesus in her heart when she was 6. We went through the process. And now my middle daughter, she's 6-year-old. She asked Jesus into her heart a couple months back.
That's cool.
As a 6-year-old. So I do see, when you're rooted in that, when you're young, I mean, Proverbs says, train up a child on the way they should go. When they're old, they won't depart from it. And I haven't departed from it. I definitely live and embody my faith. I see that in my brothers and sisters. And, I'm seeing it now in my kids. I'm seeing them accept the faith early. So that gives me hope that they're going to stay the course. And even when things start to stray, God brings them right back in because they're raised up in the way they should go.
Absolutely. And so you come into faith early, and then you said that you really felt God was leading you to join the military, to join the SEALs. So what's the story behind that? How did that come about?
All right, so we'll do the long story short thing. I went to fire college and became a firefighter again. I could have gone to play football at Liberty University and do a preferred walk-on thing, but couldn't afford to go to school, and I wasn't good enough to get like a legitimate scholarship. This was just going to be some extra money, basically cover books and things like that. Went to fire college, went to paramedic school, and was in the process of that. Went through fire college, firefighter 1 and 2 in the state of Alabama, and then went through basic EMT and started my paramedic school right after high school, and that was about a year's worth of training. My church asked us to go on a mission trip, went on a mission trip with them to Africa, and in Africa, the Lord, he just kind of guided me and led me. I always wanted to do the military or something, but the Lord kind of guided me and led me to really look into it. So when I got back home, talked with my dad, and he said, well, if you do something special, son. It's not that other military, it's not that regular military, whether Air Force, Navy, Marines, whatever it is, Army, is not important. He said, but if you're going to do something, try to do the best you can. I said, okay. And at the time they had the SOCOM contract.
Yep.
So for SEAL or for Navy, you had the SEAL contract and the SWIC contract so they just called that the NSW contract. And I think they might have had one for EOD at the time too, even though EOD didn't necessarily fall under NSW. I think that was just SEAL and SWIC when I went in. Now it's SEAL, SWIC, EOD, and diver, like a rescue diver, right?
Bigger umbrella now.
Yeah, it's a bigger umbrella, yeah. At the time, it wasn't. At the time, you had 2 options, SEAL and SWIC, when I went through. So, and this was in 2005. So,
you came in the middle of like
in the middle of the war, 2005, 2006 is when I went into the Navy, actually went in, go through boot camp and all that stuff, end of 2005, beginning of 2006, and that's where I cranked it off. First deployment, when I graduated everything, I wound up going to Iraq, then just like checking in Iraq, short tail end of a deployment for Team 3, and then going to Germany, and then going to Afghanistan. So everywhere we deployed was a combat zone all the way through my career. But Air Force had a contract. Marine Corps had an infantry they hadn't stood them up yet, but they're looking at that MARSOC Raiders, which was Force Recon. So they didn't really have a contract, but it was an infantry contract with the potential to go do that, new MARSOC Raider program, which I think they stood up in 2006. And then the X-ray, which was the Army. So that would be like Army SF. So I just looked at it. We met with all the recruiters, took it home, was talking to Dad, and the hardest test, the hardest one to obtain was SEAL. The next hardest was actually Air Force PJ. That's
a very little known fact.
Yeah, it is.
PJs are pretty insane guys. So.
Yeah, it was a harder one to obtain. PJ and combat controllers, the CCTs, and so Then it was the Army one, it was Ranger, X-ray, and then the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps didn't really have a pipeline into a special operations. They were still working on standing it up. It was just an infantry contract. So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll just pick. I had no desire to be a SEAL. Didn't spend my whole life wanting to be a SEAL. I wanted to be a Marine sniper for all intents and purposes when I was a kid. Saw that that movie with what's that movie called with. God, man, I'll think of it in a little bit.
Who's the actor?
It might be called Sniper. It's Tom Berenger.
Oh, that's Sniper.
Yeah, it's Sniper.
Like
where they cut his finger.
Them,
they cut his finger off and all that stuff. So I remember seeing that movie. I just wanted to be a Marine sniper. Read all the Carlos Hathcock books.
Yeah.
And but anyway, that being said, took the test, passed everything I needed to do to be a SEAL. And so I said, well, I guess this is the route the Lord wants me to go. So that's what I did. Yeah,
I think it's really unique when somebody feels their faith leading them to be a warrior. Because I think that's something that's missing in a lot of men now, and a lot of men don't.
Well, heck yeah, it's missing a lot of men. I mean, but you got to think and I think this is the biggest issue with it. We've seen a society that's pushed more for a feminist or a feminism mindset.
Absolutely.
And I've got 3 daughters.
Yeah.
I want my daughters to have every opportunity available to them, right? But I want those opportunities to be within the hierarchy of what God commands. And one thing I've seen is only in a nation, only in a country, only in a state, only in a city, protected by real men. I'm talking about Sigma and alpha males, right? That's how we describe them nowadays. Protected by real men, can women even have that opportunity? Mm-hmm. Because I use Afghanistan as an example because I was there when the pullout happened, and then we were there after the pullout getting people out. It went from almost first world in Kabul, right? You have like yoga, you have, different, media personalities being able to say things against Islam and say things against the Taliban. It was different seeing that and then seeing it, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks after that to where Taliban take over. There's no more half-naked yoga in Kabul. Whether you agree with it or not, it's irrelevant. These women are in burqas. These women are marching down the street in line. Doesn't matter how mouthy they want to get. There's one thing that keeps things in control and under control, and that is that's the masculine power. And that's why so many people are against it nowadays, because we've got to keep the masculine power in check. The only thing that keeps it in check is itself.
Yep.
And so I think that's why you've seen that push, getting back to what we were mentioning in our society, is we're afraid of that masculine power. And there's been a massive push for this feminist power, which is not a power, by the way. It's only able to do what it does as long as I'm not willing to crush it, because I can actually physically crush it. And on top of that, you see these weaker, really evil, in my opinion, demonic almost,
100%.
beta male personalities coming in. And by that, I don't mean a lot of people think I mean like that your job dictates what it is, or that you've got to be a UFC cage fighter. Have you seen these flipping guys? They're flipping pipe hitters. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL and going over to war. You don't have to be a dude that can get in a cage and work everybody in the world.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about men who can stand between their family and somebody who's coming through the door.
Absolutely.
And you're seeing a lot less of that nowadays, and I believe it's because we've allowed this feminist push.
Yep, I absolutely agree with you. I think that's one of our missions, really why we started Righteous Savages, was to activate men, to try and show them, hey, this is what God actually calls us to be. And I really believe that if you're not going to actually step into the masculine role that God calls you to do in the Bible, what we're supposed to be, you will give an account for that.
Oh, you're 100% correct.
You're going to have to answer for not being that.
If you don't step into the role where God has placed you, I believe it's Ecclesiastes where it says, and it might be chapter 11 or chapter 13. They can Google. It's in Ecclesiastes though. You need to tend your own field. Whatever field God has given you to till that field. Don't worry about everybody else's field. Well, heck, it's in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not covet. Don't covet your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's things, right? So that's something that we need to think about as men. As women, I tell this to my wife all the time. Do your job. Sometimes it drives her crazy that we got 3 little ones at home. She's doing a great job with them at home, but it wears her out. And she sees Instagram and Facebook and all these social medias, and it attacks her mind. And she's like, I should be doing that. No, you're doing the most important thing you can do because it's what God's called you to do. Yeah. I'm doing the most important thing I can do, providing for this family and being willing to protect this family. You're doing the most important thing you can do, nurturing this family and being willing to protect this family. Roles are important, and we try to blur those lines too much, and that's the problem. You're exactly right. Yep. If you don't, we will pay for it, we will answer for it, and we'll first answer as men for it.
Yeah, and I think we're going to answer societally for it, too.
Oh, yeah, I think we already are. That. Yeah, we already are answering societally.
It's just a broken thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And until men actually decide to stand up. And one of the things that I think probably is the most frustrating is seeing that influx into the church.
Oh, yeah, it's big.
Like,
it's big into the church.
Huge into the church.
Because you have created, there's a void because anytime you see real masculinity, it's cheapened, it's belittled, it's gone after, which comes in roles. There are specific roles. You can't be whatever you want to be. That's a lie in the American culture. You cannot be anything you want to be. A lot of guys like the book Wild at Heart, and that's fine. But one thing that bothered me is that they use Braveheart as an example. If everybody was supposed to be William Wallace, then guess what every man would be?
Right.
William Wallace. If every man was supposed to be a United States Navy SEAL, then we wouldn't have a 90% or an 85% attrition rate, whatever it is, right? If every man was supposed to fill a certain role, then they would fill that role. But we have men that fill a lot of roles, and it doesn't mean that because you're not a Navy SEAL and because you're a carpenter, because you're a plumber. I got a buddy that runs a plumbing business. Him and his brother, manly dudes back home, godly dudes, right? They're leading their family to Christ. They're doing the best they can, but they're plumbers. They're not out fighting the war on human trafficking or fighting GWAT or whatever. Or hey, how about a music minister? How about the media guys? We got a media guy at my church, and not at my church, at my company that works for me. His name's Steven. This dude was letting some chick have it in traffic. He got out of his truck, went over and knocked the dude down in the street, just punched him right in the mouth at a red light because this guy is like screaming and cussing at some lady in a car. He said, I felt like he shouldn't be doing that to a lady. and so now this guy, he's not a cop. He's not a military guy. He's a media guy, and he does music. But he stepped out. That is what we're talking about when I'm talking about that innate masculine, that innate thing that should be inside of every man. And the church most certainly cheapens it because it doesn't want you to get out and punch that dude who's running his mouth at a lady in the car.
Right.
And heck, even our culture cheapens it. Our society, as you said a minute ago, cheapens it because what's going to happen? That dude gets mad, he calls the cops, and who gets arrested? The guy who punched the other guy. Well, that's not really the way it should be. And as a cop, I'm telling you that, right? But anyway, we could digress into that.
No, that's exactly, and we got there before I actually had thought we would, but this is exactly the message that I think needs to be pushed out to men. And, we're having a men's conference here tonight, and it's really important that we have messages of, hey, it's okay to step into true masculinity, even if it is hated by society. I think that even makes it more important because if we don't have that, we're just going to see this collapse continue to happen, and then you're not going to live in the world that comes out of that. That's
100% correct, and and understanding what true masculinity is. True masculinity is not this false bravado that you see.
It's not the '80s steroid heads.
It's not that. Yeah, it's not that. It's not money. You got guys that'll say, "Hey, I got money. I can do what I want to." Hey, that's great.
The Andrew Tate thoughts.
Yeah. Hey, if you got it, great. If you ain't got it, whatever. True masculinity is one, rooting yourself in the person of Jesus Christ, because that dude was nailed to a flipping cross, not for his own doing, but for other people's problems. Yep. He was perfect, and he suffered the death he suffered because of our imperfection. So that's the number one thing, is being man enough to fully embody the person of Jesus Christ and do it, and be able to say what Paul says, mimic me as I mimic Christ. How about that? Talk about something that sounds extremely arrogant and haughty, which is not. It's not haughty. You should be able to say, hey, honey, watch me as I mimic Christ.
Yep.
Hey, kids, look at me as I mimic Christ. Because they're looking at you for something. And you're either leading them to Christ, pointing them to Christ. You're an embodiment of who Jesus Christ is, or you're an embodiment of something else and something in the world. And it says friendship with the world is enmity with God. And so I think you're exactly right. We have to not just say it's okay to step into that masculine role, but we have to let guys know, don't let the world define what that masculine role is. It doesn't mean that I can get into a ring with Mike Tyson. Now, if Mike Tyson came through my front door, I'm going to kill him.
Yep.
Right? Don't come into my house. But it doesn't mean that I need to be able to hang in a boxing ring or hang in a UFC ring or hang with Navy SEALs through Navy SEAL training or be William Wallace. All of that is worldly ideas of masculinity. Real masculinity is knowing who you are in the person of Jesus Christ and guiding your family to that and being able to stand and provide and protect your family physically when the time comes to do that, if it ever does.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that kind of ties into what you're doing in your ministry, in that, one of the biggest things that's going on in the world that's not being talked about by the mainstream media, not really being talked about in culture at all, is human trafficking.
Yeah.
And I know that you've seen that with what you're doing, and I know other people that are in this really war against this growing crime that's just, I think probably the biggest thing was the movie that came out last year about Tim Ballard.
Yeah, Sound of Freedom, Tim Ballard, yeah.
It kind of shined a light on it, but people don't understand how vast this is.
No, they don't. And I talked with Tim after the movie, and he funded a few operations we did stateside through some of his organizations. And, of course, it's Hollywood. I mean, and I worked on some of those operations with Tim in Haiti back, early on, or back in 2015, 2016. And one thing he said is, for us, Covenant Rescue Group, what we're doing, we're not really working overseas. We do some work overseas, but we're primarily focusing stateside. And he even said, hey, man, I don't know how you're doing what you're doing, but that's what I always was trying to get done. Keep at it. And so for the guy that founded, and I know he's not with OUR anymore. I know he's got other things going on, but for the guy that founded that to tell me that on the phone, probably what's this October, so this is probably, maybe December of last year, so almost a year ago, tell me that on the phone lets me know we're doing something right. And for an organization that big to say, I don't know how you're doing what you're doing, keep doing it, I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think there's any other organizations at least doing what we're doing stateside. There's aftercare, which is great. There's overseas work, which is great. There's support for law enforcement agencies, which is great. But we're partnering with law enforcement agencies, and we're law enforcement officers and special operations personnel that partner with those agencies to effectively target human trafficking 100% of the time. It's not prostitution that we hopefully get probable cause for misdemeanor prostitution charges or probable cause for a drug case or a certain person forbidden or whatever, warrant. It is somebody who's showing up to buy or sell a kid, primarily for sex. And when we do that, we are specifically targeting. And that's important. I got involved in the political world. A lot of people in politics had a guy. He's a cop. He's a state representative back home, and he didn't like me using the word targeting. Well, we don't do that in law enforcement. I'm going to take it. You better pump the brakes, bro. You might not do that because you've never done anything. Right? You've sat here and you've freaking sat in the ivory tower and you've never been out and actually worked. That's exactly what we're doing because if
targeting and profiling are real things.
If we do not target those people who are targeting our kids, we're never going to hit them. You can't – I was a sniper in the SEAL teams. If I wanted to hit a target, I didn't shoot at 5 targets. I shot at that target. It doesn't mean I don't transfer over and shoot another one, but I specifically need to hit this target. I'm never going to hit it if I'm pointing over here, but I'm looking over here at this target. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
We target very specific criminal activity and specific individuals, primarily those who are looking to exploit children.
Yeah. And so how has this, like I just said, that it just seems like there's nobody talking about this. And I think there's more and more. Why do you think that the media, why do you think that politicians really, outside of just a few, are not talking about this?
Man, I think the biggest thing is, and you hear people talk about human trafficking, but I think the biggest thing is they don't know, and we have this massive farce that's been put up, or this massive misunderstanding. Proverbs 19:2 says, zeal without knowledge causes you to miss the mark. I think people are zealous to help with human trafficking. We hear about human trafficking, but we don't hear about necessarily child exploitation in the proper way. I've had buddies say, they're hiding kids. They got kids. They're trafficking out of the tunnels of D.C. and Washington, D.C. You've probably heard some of that stuff before.
Pizzagate and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that there's not some reality to that, but I know exactly what they're talking about. I've walked through the tunnels of D.C. a bunch of times, all around. That doesn't exist. It doesn't go on. There is no cabal at a massive level that's moving kids. They're not selling kids on Wayfair. Now, could somebody within that organization be doing nefarious stuff with that organization? Are there politicians doing nefarious things? Are there groups of people possibly who click together and do nefarious things? 100%. Absolutely there are. However, generally speaking, when we're looking for it, that's not what we're looking for, because that is such a small percentage and that's such a hard percentage to tap into that we have to go after ways to get into that if it does exist. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And most groups and crowds of people will turn on the folks that are in there when they find out that is going on. Does that make sense? We saw that happen over in Georgia with the homosexual couple that adopted the kid.
Yep.
It was people in the homosexual community that turned them in because these guys were trying to sell those boys that they adopted to their buddies. And it was people in the homosexual community that turned them in. So I would go ahead and say that there isn't some massive cabal, and that's the first thing. Everybody thinks it. The second thing is most of the time, I think I could look it up, but we don't have time to. I think the statistic is 67%. 67% of these children that are exploited, it's done by a family member. So, and then the other larger percent, somewhere between 25 and 30%. Again, I can't remember. I'll try to send it to you or show it to you when we're done here so you can put it up. 25 to 30%, I believe, is people that they're well known. They're known. It's a trusted person. You know, it could be a doctor. We rolled doctors, pastors, youth ministers. I mean, everybody you would think, right? Anybody, cops. You know, we rolled cops in our last 2 operations. We had a cop in an operation telling guys not to show up because it was a law enforcement sting. Had to roll him during the op that he was on with us. So, that being said, you've got them people in all walks of life. It's not just the criminal element. It's not just gangs. It's not just, George Soros buying kids and Epstein Island and all of that stuff. That stuff does exist, but primarily the biggest bulk of this happens at the family level, and it happens at the I know you, we trust each other level, and a lot of times you have young men and young women who will never say anything about it because this is a person they trust, or maybe it's a family member. Very small percentage of time is it somebody they don't know or somebody that's been sold into something. We are seeing an uptick in that with the border issue right now.
Yep. Because I think they just said something like 300,000 kids over the last 4 years. They don't know where they're at. And
so that is something we're seeing with uptick, but it's not just sex trafficking. It's labor. It's all kinds of the stuff, but that could change that statistic. But right now, before that being the case, before the last handful of years of the Biden administration leaving the border wide open, before that is the numbers. It's basically 60% family, 20 to 30% known, and then that other smaller 10 to 20% is
opportunistic.
It's opportunistic.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Very small amount is opportunistic.
Yeah. That's crazy because you always kind of get this idea in Hollywood and all of the depictions of it that it's these people roving around in, free candy vans.
Exactly.
Picking up kids.
And it's mainly done now digitally. There's no free candy vans. Not saying that won't happen. It is still a risk, but
Instagram,
you give your kid access to the world, and the world access to your kid when you let them, get them 5G network, get them online or whatever it is. Everybody can talk to them.
One of the biggest things that kind of blew my mind, and basically me and my wife had a conversation afterwards, like our kids aren't getting cell phones till they're adults, because
that's not a bad idea.
It was an episode of Sean Ryan, and some guy that is like a hacker, a white hat. He's basically saying you give your kids a phone, you think you're giving them access to the world. You're giving the world access to your kids.
That's right. Yeah.
Think of all the creepy people. You're giving those people access to your kids.
You're exactly right. So, and I'll be honest with you, I've been saying that on our operations, and we're briefing people for about 5 years now. How long has our organization been around? Since 2020, maybe. Mm-hmm. I've been using that example, and we're just now starting to see it where people are actually starting to talk about it. Like you said, you heard Sean say it in his podcast, right? You heard. I've heard some other people say it in news releases and stuff recently. You're just now starting to hear people talk about how this is a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. And we went back and looked, and we're laughing at stuff we were putting out, literature, media stuff through Covenant Rescue Group, and we've been saying it because this is how we target bad guys. They think they're talking to a kid.
Yep.
And we've been doing it since, like I said, 2019 when we got our 501c3 status.
Yeah, so that's crazy. Well, we're going to wrap up here, but I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we'd love to have you back at some point. Maybe we can do a Zoom call or something like that.
Yeah, we can do one.
And talk through some more of this, get a little bit more in the weeds. But how can people get involved? Because I think this is probably one of the most important things is not being talked about, and support, I think, is really key with that.
Yeah,
so how do people support you?
CovenantRescue.org. We just got back from North Carolina working with a buddy of mine's organization, 25 United. We've got a page that is for that hurricane relief support. We've been running some stuff there. We had a page for Israel. We're doing some stuff in Israel, and then we got our primary donation page. So any of those 3 pages, you can click, look at, follow us on all the social medias, listen to what we're doing, see what we have going on. I'll get Steven to send over the links and stuff to you. He might even have like a link tree or like a QR code you could put up with this podcast that they can scan. But check us out, follow us, see what we're doing. If you want to donate, click donate, do that. One thing that I will say, we love the big donations, but one thing that people don't understand is, hey, I can't give $50,000, which is about what it costs to run an op. That's not what keeps us funded. What keeps us funded are the people that give. Can you give $10 a month?
Yeah.
Can you give $20 a month? Because if we have 1,000 people giving $20 a month, well, that's a big chunk of change. That's $240,000 a year.
Yep.
Now we're running. Now that covers running roughly 10 months of operations and trainings, which equates to we average 10 arrests per op. 10 felony arrests, and the DOJ number, if you want to go look, you can see where it's where it's actually at, and the American Psychiatric Association numbers both correlate on this. For every person you arrest that's showing up for a little girl, that's 50 victims before they're prosecuted, and for every person that you arrest that's showing up for a little boy, there's 150 victims before they're prosecuted. So when you look at that, and we do 10 arrests per op, you're looking at, let's just use the 50 number.
Yeah.
Let's use the 50 number right there. Let's say they're showing us, it's all girls. 500. That's 500 victims that you just marked off that you got these guys, and you brought justice to the victims they've already impacted, because they've always already impacted a victim.
Yep. And for boys, that's 1,500.
For boys, it'd be 1,500. For guys
insane.
Now, and that's a smaller group. I would say if we run a profile, we get 2 of those out of the 10 per op if we have a male, a same-sex profile.
Yeah.
And it's mainly men. That's the demographic. It's not white, Hispanic, black, anything. It's pretty much even across the board, just depending on where you're at. And it's men primarily. We have women showing up, but it's primarily men.
Yeah. Typically, women in those situations are facilitators.
Most of the time, women are facilitators. Yep. We find women on the rescues. That's where we get women doing nefarious things, on the rescues. But anyway, I know we've got to wrap it up. Go to CovenantRescue.org. Follow us. Donate. Support. Again, do not think that a $10 a month or a $20 a month donation doesn't count. Buy swag. Get hats and shirts. Everything you give us goes directly to the mission, goes directly to funding these missions and saving these kids. And every little thing that you send is vitally important. It's just like the widow with 2 mites, and God says, or Jesus says, who did more? These over here who gave out of their riches, or her over here who gave out of their poverty? And they say she did, even though she gave 2 pennies. So understand, it's not what you give, it's what you're giving it to, and it's the heart that you're giving it. So I like saying that to people, because a lot of times people get down on themselves, like, I can't give a lot. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Your little bit is oftentimes far more than somebody else's a lot.
Yeah, and there's strength in numbers, so we need more and more people
100%,
to be engaged.
100%,
so,
that's right.
Well, thank you, Jared. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. We'll be in contact. I'm actually going to see about putting a link to your website on our website so that people can funnel through our website to yours, because I truly believe in the work you guys are doing, and it is absolutely God backed. So we believe that, and so guys, we'll see you next time, and don't forget to take Jesus wherever you go and act like you believe. We'll see you next soon.